check. Check 1, 2. Starting camera now. Oh, wait. I already started it. Hello. Is anyone out there? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear Liz? That's more important.
I'll be asking the questions.
Questions.
Well, we got a hi.
Hi. Okay. Well, I don't know if that means you can hear us or not, but...
Yeah. Ooh, that scared me. I saw Marley in the background.
Yeah, she wants to be on video.
I thought
She's a movie star.
I thought she was squatting.
She is kind of squatting.
Awesome. Glad that y'all could hear us.
All right, all right. Are we ready to do some painting? It's wet blending time.
Yes,
for those of you who don't know, my name is Aaron Lovejoy. This is Liz Hunt. She's my better half, and she is why these things go better than they should. So if you have questions, I forget how that works. How does that work?
Okay, so when you look at your Zoom, there's a box at the bottom that says chat. Put all of your chatter in there. Make sure that you have selected everyone from the little drop-down menu after you click on chat.
She's doing this sign, which is the international sign for everyone.
Sorry, I my hands and they can't see me. And then there's also a Q&A box that is right beside the chat box. Click that, have it open, and that is where you will ask all of your questions, is in that Q&A box.
Yeah, that way, we've done a lot of these classes, and that way you guys can chat to your heart's content, but you can also ask questions, and we actually get them instead of having to sift through a bunch of nonsense.
Yes.
And we like nonsense, so we're not going to stop you.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So I hope everyone has been enjoying their Roll to Move con. I know they've got some new tables and stuff, which I am very excited actually to go to DiceFest. I don't know when the date of DiceFest is because I don't pay attention.
I don't know what all they've told about DiceFest yet.
Yeah.
Either. So
but it's going.
Stay tuned for information if they haven't said anything.
Yeah, that might have been a spoiler. So if it was, I'm sorry. I'm not known for keeping my mouth shut.
It's true.
But I would like to see those. I actually want to play on them live. I am going to just push people out of the way.
No, you're not.
No, I'm not. But anyways, the tables, the 3D tables are always legit. They're super cool. Those guys do a lot of work to bring their world to life. So, and my job as the studio painter for like the last 5 or 6 years has been to bring the miniatures, I guess, to life. Or copy what the concept artist brought to life first, and then I bring it to life second.
Yes.
It's like second Half-Life or Second Life or whatever that video game's called.
Not that, but sure, we'll roll with it.
Sorry, I ate salad for dinner tonight, and I've got salad all in my teeth.
Do you really?
Mm-hmm.
It's fine.
Yeah. Anyways, rabbity, whatever.
Just talk like this.
Yeah, that's right. Ever since I moved to the southeast here in the United States.
In the Georgias.
I don't think I have an accent, but, whatever.
It comes out.
I'm holding on to the San Diego lifestyle. You know what I'm saying? Keeping it gangsta.
Ooh, yeah, 2 Michaels. Okay, all right. Y'all ready to learn some wet blending?
Wet blending it is.
If you say no,
then you're in the wrong class.
So sorry.
Yeah. But it should be entertaining anyways. And like I said, this is a great time to ask questions. So if you tried it in the past and I don't answer the question that maybe you had, or there was an issue that you had and you're like, hey, how do I solve this? Or how do I troubleshoot this? This is a really awesome time to ask because I've been doing this a long, long time and I've seen just about everything. There's like one thing that I've not been able to answer, but that was a question about how to grow hair back when you go bald. And clearly, I have not figured that one out. So, okay.
And
so,
just to somebody did just come in. Just to reiterate, please put all of your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen.
Q&A box, bottom of the screen.
Okay.
All right. All this stuff is recorded, so don't worry. You can watch it again later. If you have a friend, you can always recommend them to watch it if you think this will help them or whatever. It's awesome. Okay. So that being said. Do it. Okay, so let's start with our web palette. And where the heck is my web palette? It's not there. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I am like losing it here. Okay, so this is a web palette. You can see I can kind of pull it out of the way here. This is a Red Grass Games one. They're pretty awesome. This is one of their smaller versions. I like it because it works great for when you're streaming and you need a small web palette on the side of your screen. To be honest, I don't like their paper. I think the paint dries out really quick for me on it. Maybe other people have a different experience, but that's the experience I have. I just use regular Reynolds palette paper or parchment paper. It works great. It's super cheap. Get the Reynolds. It's the best. Don't go to the dollar store because I did that once and it was the worst parchment paper ever. It was like super thin and it just ripped up and it was bad deal altogether. But the Reynolds works really well. The one thing I do really like about the Red Grass Games wet palette is it has a white sponge as opposed to like Masterson's has a yellow sponge. So it's kind of nice because you can actually see the colors without a yellow tint to everything, which is really cool. So the other thing I've noticed over the years of painting is when I'm using a wet palette, if my water level starts dropping in the palette, and I should probably turn the sound of my phone off so we don't have to listen to that. All right. So what I noticed was as the water level went down, the paint on my palette would dry up quicker. You don't normally notice these things when you only paint for a couple hours in a night or half an hour a week or whatever, but you notice it when you're painting 16 hours a day. I try to keep my water level all the way to the top of the sponge here. And you see if I set it in here, it's like right at the top of the sponge. You don't want it to be too much higher than that because your palette will just start floating around inside your wet palette. Or your parchment paper will float around in the wet palette, and that's always kind of lame when you're chasing your paint all over the place. But for that, this is my optimal wet palette setup. The reason I use a wet palette is not to keep paint for a month and a half. I only keep the paint, I throw my palette paper away at the end of the day. It's just to keep my paint wet during my paint session that's happening right now. Now I know some of you are like, oh, but I mixed this really cool color and I want to have that for later. But what I found is the longer you keep this paint, even if it's in a wet palette and you put the lid on it and it's active for a month or 2 weeks or something, that paint starts getting weird consistencies and stuff. Paint's always best when it's fresh. Not to mention, there's a massive problem with molding sponges. And even though Red Grass Games says this is an anti-mold sponge, Liz has proven them wrong by molding her sponge.
Exactly. You're welcome.
And it was gross.
It was super gross.
And if you're a brush licker like I am and you're dipping your brush into the wet palette to get water and stuff, you don't want moldy sponge in your mouth. That's just gross. So people always ask me how to keep it from molding. I let it dry out every single night. All of our palettes in this house dry out every single night. This also makes you get good at mixing your paints. So that's also a good quality to have. So that being said, keep your sponge full of water, let it dry out at night, and you will be a happy camper. The reason for using a wet palette, and this is the one tool, if I forget my paintbrushes at home, I can use somebody's hand-me-down paintbrushes at the game store or something. I can still paint. But if I don't have my wet palette, that's the one thing that I will just not even bother painting because paint dries out way too quickly on a normal palette for me, and I just like the fact that wet palettes keep your paint wet longer. And this really helps when you're wet blending and stuff. And like when you're painting, all of your Shadows of Brimstone models, it takes a long time. And if you're constantly putting paint back on your palette, a lot of times that will that kind of promotes me stopping painting. so the wet palette works great for that. Other than that, there's absolutely no reason to use a wet palette. If you like tiles or whatever, go ahead and use it. It doesn't matter. If you really like the Red Grass Games palette paper that comes with it, that's great because everything needs to cater towards your painting style and everything. And same goes for these techniques that I'm going to show you here for wet blending. If you find that you can do it better a different way, do it better a different way. It doesn't have to be my way. So I'm just telling you my optimal setup here. All right. So that being said, we will switch back to the paint camera. All right, so I've got some models here that we're going to do some demo wet blending on. I got a big one, a small one. And then the one thing you've probably noticed over the years, I sculpt my own bases for Shadows of Brimstone. I always try to make them kind of close to the world that they're representing. So I've got stuff, Targa Plateau, Tredaran, sort of trench-looking warfare bases, that type of thing. It's a Tredaran one. I've got the Minecraft bases with the mine tracks and everything like that on there. So one of the best ways to practice wet blending right off the bat is on bases. So I'm going to show you that here in a second, but I'm going to show you the technique first. Because wet blending took me about 7 years to learn. It was probably one of the longest things, one of the things that I wanted to learn the most and just took the longest to actually get down and figure out how it worked. But you're going to figure it out here in the next few minutes. So that's awesome. You just saved, a decade of trial and error. So we're going to practice, or I'm going to practice on a base. If you want to practice on bases, that's a great thing. Normally I use a base that I can actually use in the game because then your practice actually, bears some fruit. But otherwise, you can just grab a blank base and practice on that because it's a big area, it's flat, it's smooth, and it gives you an opportunity to blend in a bigger spot because blending on a face is much harder. So that being said, I'm going to grab a couple colors, and typically what I do, actually I shook these up before class, but you never know. You never can tell these days. You gotta find where it actually is.
Also, our luck with clogged paints too.
Yeah, is just really, really good. We're batting 1,000, let me tell you.
Terrible with not having.
So one thing with wet blending is you don't want the thinnest paint in your stable of paints. So like this yellow color is a nice color of yellow. However, it's a little bit thinner base. Like it doesn't cover as well. And I've found that paints that cover better, they're more opaque, work better for wet blending. The second thing that I found is the paint right out of your pot is that, so even though this yellow is not good for wet blending right off the bat, it is at 100% of its capabilities when I put it out of the bottle. So this yellow will do the best that it can do. It covers the best. It is the brightest yellow it can be right out of the bottle without any thinning or anything. Once you start thinning your paint, and what's the golden rule right now online is thin to the consistency of skim milk, which you got to imagine is probably about 40% thinner, maybe 40, 50% thinner, maybe more. Now your paint's at 50% of its capability. It's at 50% of its opacity. It's at 50% of its saturation, all that stuff. You're losing the power of this paint by thinning it. So one thing that I've been learning over the years is to paint with thicker and thicker paints. What I found with wet blending is you really don't want to put water in your paint. Now, can you put water in your paint? Yes, of course you can, but you're making it harder for yourself. So when you're learning, just don't put any water in your paint and you'll be fine. So that being said, I'm going to show you kind of the brush stroke that I'm going to use on this. This technique is called meet in the middle wet blending, and I call it that because basically you meet in the middle, and I couldn't think of anything else to call it. There's several different ways to wet blend.
Super simple.
Yeah, this one is meet in the middle. Yes, the colors meet in the middle. So we're gonna start. I always pull the brush back towards myself. So if you're a painter like this and you always paint the opposite way, don't do that. Start pulling the brush back this way. Unless you find that's way easier to paint that way, but I think you'll find that this is much easier. So you're always going to be putting the paint on and pulling back towards yourself. So we wouldn't start up here, we'd actually start there because we'd be applying color and pulling it back towards myself, and that's where the blend's going to start happening, right? When I do the other color, I spin the model around, or the base around in this case, and I start up there and I pull the brush back this way. So I'm always pulling back towards myself. I can control my paint better. I can control the angle of my brush better. And you're going to find as I'm doing this, the angle of my brush matters when I'm wet blending. So when I first apply paint, it's always like the tip of the brush, putting the paint on. And as I pull it this way, notice the brush pushes down. It's flat. It's like an eraser. And so what's happening is this is a technique that I've kind of developed over the years. I'm sure a lot of people do it, but I came up with it on my own for once. And it's called painting thick paint thin. So you're not thinning the paint. You're actually just pressing the brush down so it thins the paint out, and it puts a very thin coat of that thick paint on your model. So at the start of the blend, it doesn't matter how thick the paint is because you just want it to be opaque. But as you start coming down this way, so as I start, I put the brush on like that. Let me actually squeeze in a little closer here. Whoa, my hands are huge. So when I first apply the paint, usually the brush is up on the tip like this, and so I'm just laying the paint down. And as I pull back, I start, see that brush is flattening out. And I go back and forth like this. Now here's the other thing. A lot of people paint like this. So you're doing exactly what I said. You're pulling back this way. A lot of people do this. Oops. They flick the base right out of their hands. Yeah. No, they do this. They do the line thing. Or they go this way. And they're constantly picking their brush up and putting it back down. So what this promotes, when your paint's thick like that, every time you push the brush down, it does what? It creates those little troughs of paint out the sides. And if you're wondering why my thumb is orange, it's because I ate Cheetos last night. Anyways, it really stains your fingers. So what I do when I'm pulling my brush or when I'm doing my brush strokes is I start at the start of my brush stroke and I keep the brush always stays on the model and I go back and forth like this. Now sometimes I find that it's better to do little circles or sort of a back and forth motion or back and forth like this horizontally. Whatever it is, I'm not picking the brush up and putting it back down to create more marks. I'm just pushing that paint around, and as I start pushing harder on my brush, that's flattening out that paint. Also, I'm hoping that the paint itself starts running out. So you just run out of paint. The other thing that I'm looking for is an exit strategy. So every time you pick your brush up, what happens? You leave a pool of paint right there, right? So as I'm going back and forth and I know, okay, I'm at the point where I want this color to stop, I find a way off the model. On this base, it's really easy. I just go off the base. If you're working on a model like this, maybe you start painting up here and then you go off the model. You find a good exit strategy to get off the model. Sometimes you got to be real clever, but it'll work out. So that being said, I completely forgot to talk about brushes. So speaking of your brush and putting it on there and keeping it on the model, so it used to be that all the cool kids only used Klinsky sables. So Klinsky sable is like the best brush hair out there. You'll get the finest tip. It's like an awesome brush. They're also very expensive brushes. So this is my Raphael 8404. This brush is a Rublev brush that is like almost impossible to get right now, but it's probably one of the best freehand and detail brushes out there. It's actually made for fingernails. So these two brushes are really good, but they are not really good. This one's really not good because it's so small. I mean, can you imagine trying to wet blend this whole base with this teeny tiny brush and you're never picking the brush up? You're just, barely.
You ruin that brush in
Yeah,
5 seconds.
and you're going to ruin the brush. This brush could handle it, but the problem is it's a Klinsky sable. And Klinsky sables tend to put the paint down unevenly. I don't know why this is. It's just a thing. When you're doing blends and stuff and glazing, it works out perfectly. But when you're doing wet blending, it doesn't work nearly as good. So what I found is I've gone full circle in my painting career. I started with hobby brushes, synthetic hobby brushes, and now I'm back with synthetic hobby brushes. So I just use these cheaper ones. This one's a 50-cent brush. You can tell because all the paint's falling off of it. But it works great, and it's huge. This is the size 6 brush from Monument Hobbies, and it is an awesome brush too. This is a Sam Lynn's brush, and it's amazing. It's a size 6, not a size 8, and it's bigger than the size 8. So it holds a lot of paint, and it's great for wet blending. So that being said, let's do a sample on this. So again, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put the paint on thicker at the start of my brush stroke. By pushing down on my brush and moving my brush back and forth, I'm thinning the paint out, and I'm trying to run out of paint. So what happens if I get to the middle and I still have tons of paint on my brush, like I loaded it way too thick? What do you do, Liz?
I'm sorry, I was reading a question.
I'm just kidding.
Somebody posted a question.
It was a dramatic question.
Oh,
so
okay.
what do? You start over. No, you can quickly use your exit strategy off the model. Wipe your paint off on your puddle pad that you're using for a backdrop because they're the best things for picking up paint when you spill it. And then go right back to the model and continue your blend. So what you did was you had too much paint on your brush, and this happens to me all the time. I'll start painting a face, and I'll put, like, I always pick up too much paint when I'm painting faces. I start the brush stroke in the back of the face with the shadow, wipe the brush off, continue it, and then grab my next color and wet blend it. So that's a great way of controlling your paint. Now on a big base like this, you might actually start going and you actually run out of paint way too soon. So you can always grab more paint. But so that being said, this is how I load my brush.
Okay, while you're getting ready for that, I'll ask
you
you
have a question, right?
Yeah. Basically, what is the best black that you have found? I know the answer already, but I'm letting you answer.
I forgot what it's called.
Dragon black.
Reaper's Dragon Black is the best black that I found. And I know Shadows Brimstone makes a black, but I'm just being honest. Reaper's Dragon Black is friggin' awesome. It covers really well with typically with one coat, and that's what I want out of my black. A lot of brands, as soon as you thin them a little bit, they turn kind of grayish, and that's not good.
And that was the issue that he was having.
So, yeah, I never thought that'd be a problem. Like, my black is not covering very well, but that is definitely a thing. And so I like the Reaper Dragon Black. It's my favorite. So, my dog's being crazy. Sorry. Okay, so let me switch cameras here to my palette cam. So basically when I'm picking up paint, I'm going to start with this really big old brush. So I just stick my brush in there and start grabbing paint. Again, I've not added any water to it. What you're going to find when you add water to this paint, when the two colors end up meeting in the middle, a lot of times if the paint's too thin, it will spider. So like the colors just go bloosh, and they kind of, it's not controllable. So I just try to keep it as thick as possible. Also, I get better coverage. Again, going back to it's at 100% of the capability of this paint right now. That's what I want. And this is also why I don't use the palette paper that comes with like the Mastersons, because it actually lets water up through the palette paper and then paint down into the palette. And you can tell that this doesn't do that, because if I pull this back, there's no pool of paint under where my paint is. There's paint out here, and that's because I cleaned my brush off out there. So, oh, you know what? I forgot a paper towel.
Every time.
Every time.
As soon as you said, oh, you know what?
Yep, you knew what?
I knew what?
You know, Miniac, if you don't know who Miniac is, he's a big YouTube star. He has palette or paper towels under his desk.
I saw that,
it's super.
You know what we're going to do when we get our new desk maybe eventually? That's exactly what we're going to do.
That's exactly what we're going to do?
Yes.
That'll be awesome. All right. So one of the things, if you clean your brush off, you can inadvertently put water into your paint. You can actually add water to your paint just by cleaning your brush. So I wash my brush out in a paper towel, and then everyone does this, right? And they move on. Like I just wiped it off, the water's out. Well, that's not really true. You got to crimp it, and that gets all the water out. Now, here's the other thing. When I'm wet blending, unless it's like going from white to red and I don't really want it to turn pink just yet, I don't mind a little bit of the old color still being in my paintbrush when I grab a new color, because that also helps with the blending process. All those colors mesh together and they end up looking really nice together. So don't think you have to clean your brush after everything. And also when you're wet blending, you don't really have time to clean your brush. So that being said, we'll go back to our palette cam. I'm going to grab some of this paint. I grab a whole bunch. And I usually, to sort of thin out the paint on my brush, I always pull it back like this. So if you see my palette, there's always a trail of paint coming off this way. Whether it's blended with another color or whatever, I always grab it and I start pulling back. And that basically, I get a bunch of paint and I push it back out. And I have just a little bit of that thick paint in my brush. And this way, like if I'm painting a face, I can actually have probably the right amount of paint on my brush. Now, this is way too big of a brush to paint this face, but just an idea. So, Where did all my paint go? I haven't even painted yet and I ran out of paint.
It didn't dry.
I know. I just moved it around.
Sure.
This brush is so stinking big, it's probably all in the brush. All right, so I'm going to grab this. Move back in. I'll kind of set this up so you can see a little bit better. So there's my brush, and you can see there's quite a bit of paint on the one side of it. It's pretty thick there. So a lot of times what I'll do is I grab my paint, pull it out, push that up, pull it out. It kind of flattens my brush out so there's not a whole lot of paint in it. I grab a little bit of that paint on the tip of the brush, so it's really thick right there. That's probably terrifying to most of you. And basically I set it on the model, and then I don't push hard. The lighter your touch, the more it just stays right on top. It doesn't leave brush strokes or anything, and it's very, very opaque. Going back and forth. I know I need more paint, for sure. Go back like this. And at about this point, I'm going to push down on my brush. So this probably is not going to work on the first try because I'm talking too much. But see how it's thicker back here and it thins out as it's coming forward. Let's just see if we can pull this off. So I'm not even going to clean my brush. I'm going to start over here. I'm going to start right here because I've been talking too much and I need that extra time. And you just move those colors in like that. Now this one, you can see there's a little bit of opacity issues here, but that's okay because we can always put a second coat on. There's always the opportunity for a second coat. I'm going to put in some more thick paint right up there, and you let that dry. So, but this has gone from a really dark brown to a lighter brown. Now, one of the things when you're wet blending is you always want to look at your colors, and like this one is okay, but if it was these two colors, let me pull these out. These are two bad colors to wet blend into each other because they're too close to each other. You're not going to see a difference on the model. So you want to have some contrast. You want to go from like this crimson hand to light flesh. That's a huge, huge contrast, and wet blending will let you do that. Now, the other thing is, a lot of people, they think that wet blending is like this perfect process, and you're going to get this perfect blend first try. And that's what they're striving for. And when they don't get it, they get upset, they get bummed out, and they quit. Stop trying to do wet blending because they don't think that's what it is. Wet blending is not a perfect process. Sometimes it goes down perfectly, and you're like, wow, I am the wet blending superstar. That was a perfect blend. Other times, this one's a little bit streaky, but I've seen my own wet blends that are massively streaky. So sometimes I actually use this to my benefit, and I put texture in, which will be seen tomorrow. So be sure to...
It is not drying either.
Yeah, of course it's not going to dry. It's like 100 degrees out. And so that being said, that's basically how I get the paint on. So I start with and it could be the darker color or lighter color. It doesn't really matter which one you start with first. It's just you start with one, go this way, spin the base around or the model around, grab your other color, and start from the other end. Press lightly with your brush stroke up here, and then when you push harder as you get closer to the blend. The reason the two colors blend together nicely is because there's barely any paint right there. Now, if they don't blend, like if you physically see where the other color was underneath and it's dried, that means you painted too slowly and it dried out on you. So, any questions so far? I'm going to do a demo on one of these bases, or maybe two of them. Also going to grab some of this black. The thing I really like about Shadow's black is it's very thin consistency. So it's great for like making teeny tiny little black lines. It flows really well. And it is fairly opaque. It's just that Reaper black is like the king of opacity. Okay, so no questions? Any answers?
Oh, we do have one
Oh,
question.
okay.
All right. When I try to paint over wet paint, I sometimes end up just wiping the paint underneath clean. What can I do to prevent that?
Use less paint. So where I said I started and I run out of paint right here, where that blend comes together, if you have too much paint, what ends up happening is your colors just start swirling around each other. There's nowhere for the paint to go. So if there's so much paint, it doesn't work. Also, you're probably pushing too hard when you get to that second color, and you're basically just scraping off that color, or the first color is just overtaking the second color. You've probably seen that where, like, if I was using like that crimson hand color, maybe it is really strong and it takes over most of my brown. I don't want that to happen. So then the next time I do it, I'm going to use very little of the crimson hand so it doesn't do it as bad. So let me see. I wonder if I can simulate what they're talking about on something. Yeah, I'll just do it on the bottom of the base. So do this color. So I think what they're saying is they put that one on and then they grab their other color, and then you go in and it basically, if you push hard, look, I can pretty much, if I push hard with this brush, I can clean all the paint off. That would be some good weathering right there, some good dirt. Remember that. Even your mess ups can be some learning opportunities for something else. So really play with how much paint you're putting down. Also, I bet you $10 you're thinning your paint quite a bit, and that also doesn't help you when it comes to blending at all. Believe me, you can thin your paint, but you have to have really good brush control to pull it off right.
Also, be sure that if you're having to do multiple layers, like Aaron would have to for that base that he did.
Yeah, and I'll do it as soon as it dries.
Make sure that everything dries completely before you add more paint on top.
Yes.
Because if not, it's going to pick that paint right back up. Liz
is absolutely correct. Or it'll pick up just a pocket of it. And that is a real bummer because you've actually put fairly thick paint down and it will leave a divot in your paint, and that's no good. No bueno. Okay, so I'm gonna do a wet blend on this. So when I do bases, here's my thought process. And I learned this from a much better painter than me, Jeremy Bonamont. But basically his premise was when you have a model on a base, if you paint the back part of the base darker than the front part, it creates like a silhouette around the model. And so it creates like a little border for the model to be in. And so you can have your highlights and stuff up here. So if you notice on my Zenithal Prime here, which is a black primer with white sprayed on top of it from an angle, I have it much lighter at the front and darker at the back. So the cool thing is all your paints, even when they're super opaque, they always let a little of that background show through. And so you can actually use this kind of to your advantage over here. But I think I want this base to be a little bit darker than the brown that I have out right now. And the brown I have out right now is something, dark flesh, which is a good color. It's just not quite dark enough. And then I'm using leather brown for the highlight color. So I'll go like this. I'm going to grab some of my dark flesh, pull it out on my palette, grab a little bit more. And the reason why I say practice on bases is because they're so clunky and there's so much detail usually that even a choppy blend looks pretty smooth on a base. So it's like the best way to learn because you get a chance to feel like you're doing a good job and then get better at wet blending. And then you move to a miniature and you maybe don't ruin it as much. So, okay, so I'm going to start right here. This is the other good thing about these synthetic brushes is I'm not scared to manhandle them and really sort of jab them in there and get my paint in all the cracks and crevices. Or if I did that with my Raphael, I would probably have a ruined Raphael. So I only do that with Liz's Raphaels. Just kidding.
Yes, thanks. What's funny is that they're your Raphaels.
Well, that's, yeah. So joke's on me, always. Okay, so we'll start with this. I want the brown to go about halfway. And yeah, so I'm just going to put that on. Start moving up like this. If I notice I feel like I need some more of that brown paint, I can always just grab it and put it right back in. This one I kind of have to pick my brush up to get over these railroad tracks, but I'm trying to keep my brush always on the model. But also notice that the paint is thinner right here. Turn it around, grab my lighter color, and we'll start up here. Again, I'm thinning it out. A lot of times when I get to the point where I want to blend them together, I slow down my brush stroke too. So it gives the paint time to blend on my model. Go like that. I'll consider this 3 different sections. And then I'm using my train track as my exit strategy. So you see, it's not perfect right here. And these paints actually are a little bit see-through, a little bit more than my taste for it. But that's okay, because we can always just put a second coat on if they ever dry. So we get that on. The back, since it's a little see-through, is a little bit darker the way I wanted it. But I'm going to go ahead, do a little trick here. All this paint's still wet. I'm going to grab some more of that brown, and I'm going to grab just a little bit of my black on the tip of my brush. And I'll literally wet blend that in back here.
It's going to take a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, it's a little bit of black back and forth. So you see, it's not perfect, but it's totally okay. I got paint on the model. It's lighter in the front. It's darker in the back. So I'm going to do another one. If you're worried about the paint being too thick, unless your detail is super, super fine, it's not going to really hurt anything. When it dries, it will look thin, especially if you don't have any brush strokes in there.
And if you need Aaron to show you how to wet blend with any of the other like brands, like paint brands
I
or
got them
whatever,
all.
let us know and he can do that. So we've got all of them.
Just about. I'm not paint brand specific. I'm like whatever I like the colors of or they work really well, like the Reaper Black. It's an awesome color. So we got that. Let's see. This one's almost dry, I think.
Almost. Do me blow on it?
I was about to, but I don't think that's going to help. I'm putting it down on my fan down here.
That's what that noise was. I thought something was wrong with my monitor.
Oh, yeah, it's something wrong with your monitor.
Thanks.
Okay, so we've got this one. I'm going to do a second coat. See that? Really thick paint. But then when I get out to here, it starts thinning out. Go like this. Go the other direction. Light pressure. And then when I get to where I want it to blend, I push a little harder. Look at that. That blend's starting to look a lot better. Now this one might take a third pass, but also it's just a big flat area. So it's always going to take a little bit more paint to get looking smooth. But we're starting to see a much better blend now, and that's cool.
It is a big flat area, but also it could also be because you have white primer.
That's true
so with
too.
darker paints, sometimes it may just be easier to have black primer.
Yeah, and sometimes when I'm priming the model and I know that I want something to be really dark in an area, I leave it more dark back there. I don't put as much white. So you can be very strategic about how you prime a model.
Mm-hmm.
You'll also notice this is a cool technique because, getting these colors in here, I get back to my blend and I get that right there and I'm like, you know what, I wish the tan went further this way. So I'm just going to continue on and go right into that darker brown. Look, I brought that tan all the way back here, but it's still a little bit darker right there. The beauty of this now is I look at it and I'm like, oh, you know, I went a little too far that way. So I'm going to grab some of my dark brown and maybe a little bit of that black and go back the other way. I can literally change the direction of my blend. And if I come up on this, so I brought that dark color way up this way. So I brought it that way and then I brought it this way. So it's really neat. Remember back in my graphic artist days, making t-shirt designs, Adobe Illustrator or CorelDRAW, whatever I was using at the time, it had like the slider bar when you had a blend between two colors, and you could slide the slider bar and it pushed the darker brown up higher or the lighter brown down lower. And I always thought that was really cool. And this is the closest I've come to actually painting like a computer program. You can just go back and forth as much as you want. Now there's a finite amount of times you can do this. Eventually you have too much paint on the model. Like you don't want so much paint on there. The more paint you get, the thicker the amount of paint, not the thickness of the paint, but the amount of paint that's on there, it starts becoming unwieldy. You can't, it's very hard to actually get a blend when there's so much paint on there. Also, you might start losing some details. But even with this being fairly thick the way it is, when it dries, it will dry to a very thin layer. So it's all good. Look at this one again, much better. It's pretty cool. All right, so any questions on that, or the practicing of the wet blending, or whatever? Is anyone shocked and incensed that I'm not thinning my paint? Good.
Crickets.
Crickets is what I like. All right.
Is that what you like? No, that is not what you like.
So the second thing that you want to practice on, or that's good to practice on, is larger models, because obviously the smaller the model, it gets much more fiddly. So I'm going to grab some of these other colors. Right now I've got serpent skin. I'm going to grab some of this color, crimson hand red. Typically crimson colors are not very thick, so this I'm not sure how this is going to wet blend, but we will find out really quickly. I also need, what else do I need? I need this weird yellowy color, which is pale flesh, also known as a weird yellowy color.
Yeah.
Put a little of that on my
It's
palette.
like sunshine.
Yeah, it's like sunshine, daisies. And just so you know, a lot of times I put a lot of colors on my palette and I don't use half of them. It's just they're there, they're ready to go. If I need them, great. If I don't, at least they were there. And then grab a little bit of this white. I don't know if that will actually come out.
That one's clogged.
It is?
Yep.
Can you give me a different white?
I sure
Just
will.
any-
Do you just want
anything?
your sheet? Oh, show me back.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll grab it.
Okay, so we're gonna grab this larger model. Big old Goliath. This is my Goliath that I get to play with. So it's a great opportunity to start painting it.
This is fancy.
Fancy titanium white.
There we go.
So what I've got on my palette here is I've got tentacle blue, which is like a tealish, a dark teal. I've got our green, our serpent skin. I've got that fair skin or pale skin. And then I've got crimson hand red. And do I want brown? I've already got brown on my palette way up there. So if I need it, I can grab from some of this stuff at the top of my palette. I'll just put it right there.
Question.
Answer.
Okay. Are there general rules like color theory stuff about what colors will and won't wet blend together? I'm mostly asking about different colors entirely, not shades, hues of the same color.
Yeah, of course, like there's certain colors that just don't look good mixed together. Trying to think of a good example. I used to always use orange and purple. It's a bad color combination, but I've found that you can make it work and it looks fantastic. So there, technically every color goes with every color. It's just where you place them, how much you place them, how saturated they are, how desaturated they are. It all matters to, and part of that is just putting paint on a model and being willing to just be like, that looks awful.
Yeah.
Ask a friend if you're not sure, if you're colorblind or something, just be like, is this good or bad? Things like, and let me grab my color wheel here. This is called the Real Color Wheel. I suggest you go online, type in the Real Color Wheel, and a million of these come up. Download one and print it out. Print it out 5 times so you got plenty of them. I like this color wheel because I've got all these colors in my collection. There's lots of shades of each color. If you look at the color wheel you get from like Michael's or something, you've got like yellow, you've got a orange, you've got red, you've got magenta, a purple, a blue, a teal, and a green. And that's it. And a greenish yellow. Those are the colors. They don't have all these in-between colors. And it's important because as the hue switches, you'll see. So if you ever notice that putting red and green never looks good, it always turns out muddy and everything. The reason for that is the red that we typically use in our hobby is this warmish red that's over here. So like if you're a Games Workshop fan, like Blood Angels red or Blood red or whatever. So a color like that, a very warm orangish red. Okay, that's the most popular red in the industry right now. It is not directly across from green. Look at that. Green's over here. It is actually across from a bluish teal. So that's why a warm red would look great with this tentacle blue. So that's what I would blend into warm red to have like a dark shadow going up into that red, and it looks fantastic. Whereas if I put this warm red into green, I get this muddy brownish color, and it's always weird. Now, red technically can go into green, but that's red that's way over here that's getting much, much closer to magenta. So having your tones on the correct side of the tone. So if you notice, every single color has a warm and a cool side. Even yellow, it's kind of weird, but well, yellow is the warm side, but it's definitely very warm on the orangey side. As soon as it starts going green, that's definitely cooling off the yellow, which is funny because now that green is very warm compared to regular green or teal. It's incredibly warm, but it's cool compared to yellow. So you just have to be careful of where you are in that color on the color wheel, and then that's what the corresponding. That's why I really like this particular color wheel, because it corresponds better with one, contrasting colors, and two, I can probably find this color somewhere up in here on my color wheel. I can find it. So it's much easier to go, I've got that color, and this corresponds right across into this warm red. Boom, I'm good. Perfect. Same with, that's how I discovered that olive is actually across from magenta. So like you're doing orc skin or something, you're doing some olive skin tones, you put like a magenta kind of color into that green, and it makes the greatest shadows you've ever seen. It's just a very, very good way to work your colors. So you can technically blend any color into any color, and wet blending is nice because it actually physically blends those two colors together. It's just using your color wheel smartly will help a lot. So that being said, we can see that kind of in action here. I'm not going to blend contrasting colors so much in here. So the contrasting color to this green, oops.
Knock it over.
Is just first I'll throw the model.
Yeah.
So this green is like over here somewhere, one of these two. So you see it is, again, it's somewhere over here in the magenta-y. You could even argue maybe if it starts going more towards the yellow, like it's in this one, maybe right there or there, it's starting to move this way into purple. So that's why like lime green looks great with purple. It just does. It's an awesome color combination. So that being said, I'm not going to use any of that theory, but I do know that green and teal look fantastic together.
Yes.
So one of the things when you're choosing your colors is there are recessive colors, which mean they fall backwards in our vision, or they look further away, or they look darker. It recedes. And that color is blue. There's other colors like yellow that will make a highlight look brighter and look closer to you. It actually physically looks closer to you than blue does. So we can use this to our advantage. I've got green skin on this Goliath. And as much as I like painting my own models, like completely unique from whatever I've done for Shadows of Brimstone, I really like the green Goliath, so we're going to make a green Goliath. But I'm going to do it different than what I did for the studio. And tomorrow then I will show you how to put texture on this. But for now, we're just going to add some green. So I'm checking my zenithal prime, and zenithal primes aren't always correct. Like maybe I don't need a shadow right there, but the way my airbrush was spraying, I got a shadow there. So sometimes I need to obliterate that, but other times I can use this to my advantage. I see where my highlight colors, or the main white, is up here on top of this thigh, and then it gets darker underneath. It's lighter up here, but it's not as dark down here. So it's more dark here, less dark there. So I can use that to my advantage when I'm putting colors on. When I'm wet blending, it's very easy to remember where it was really dark and where it was really light. So in this case, I'm going to start with this green. And let's move this in a little bit. And if my Goliath ends up turning out bad color scheme, I'm going to blame all you guys. No.
Oh my gosh.
No, it's going to look awesome. So normally I would do this with the airbrush, but sometimes I don't have my airbrush around. So I'm just going to do it with the paintbrush. So one thing that people make a mistake on is they'll go from the center part and maybe they'll try to paint this whole top section on both sides. And then when they go to blend the other side, it's already dry. So I just stay right in the middle. I know this is perfectly opaque green. I want it to be completely opaque, that color of green. So I'm going to put that on. I'm going to put some on over here. I'm purposely letting it run out on my brush. So I'm moving it back and forth. I'm not adding any more paint. So I have much less paint down here than I had up there. I'm going to flip the model around. Then I'm going to grab that tentacle, bluish green color, and work my way back up. That gives me a bluish green down here. It's darker. It's part of that is there's black down there and it's making it physically darker, but it's also a bluish color. It looks darker. It appears darker. So we got that. I'm going to put some more of this stuff. And I'm just going to show you, I started with the light color and went to the darker color. I'm going to start with the dark color and go to the light color. It really kind of doesn't matter. There's certain colors that it does matter, but you're going to find that out real quick because it won't blend very well. So, or the one color will overtake the other color very quickly. So we'll get this. I'm going to go all the way up to the back of this calf right here. And then we'll grab my lighter green color. Oops, put my hand right in the wet paint. That's not technically what you're supposed to do, but hey, we're painting on camera, so it is what it is. So you see how well that blend looks compared to our base? So that's why when people are practicing on a base or something, they're like, my blend's not totally perfect. Put it on something that's very textured and you'll be like, dang, that looks really good. Part of it is there's all that texture there and you can't see the inconsistencies in the blend. So it definitely, this technique is really, really good for doing very textured surfaces. Now, if you're doing something like a Guardian or something, maybe it's not the best technique because it's very hard to get that perfectly smooth blend. You can do it, it's just going to take a long time. So we got that. Pretty good? Pretty all right? People hate my color choices? I should rethink my life.
No, they're not saying that at all.
They're mesmerized. Okay, so we've got that. Which way did I do it before? I did dark to light or light to dark? I did light to dark. So I'm going to do dark to light again. So again, I'm pulling the brush towards myself. And I'm not pushing real hard right now. I'm not pushing hard on the brush. I'm going back and forth trying to get in all the cracks and crevices. And now I'm pushing a little bit harder. My paint's staying out. You can see it's not covering as well because I have less paint. Switch this around. Grab my green, start right here under the kneecap. We'll go all the way down into that bluish teal.
Look how pretty.
It's so pretty. Yeah, my Goliath's going to be on fleek.
Oh my gosh. Is this ours for a game?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
It is ours. All right, so over here, really, really dark. So I know that's going to be a very dark shadow. I'm going to show you something extra there here in a second. So go here. I'm only going to go halfway up because that highlight on top of the thigh, it looks like it goes really low over here. So I'll start right here, go back to the crotch. That blends in nicely. I like it. Up here, it's going to be all this color. So you might be asking yourself, there's lots of little bumps and crevices up here. Why am I not highlighting and shading all of them? And the answer is...
because we're not there yet.
Yeah, we ain't there yet. So the first colors you put on a model are your general colors, the general vision. So bright green, bluish teal. That's the color. I'm not worried about highlights and shadows in between the colors, in between like underneath this knee. Now, if there's big stuff, I kind of intentionally missed the green on the underside of this thing because I knew that was a big, deep, dark shadow. I got the hiccups like crazy. So I could just immediately put in some of that bluish teal right there. And I don't need to put my green there. So sometimes I do intentionally leave stuff blank. But normally, up here on top, there's lots of detail that could have shadows. It could have highlights and stuff. But we're not there yet. So just think of it as this is the first pass. It's almost like airbrushing it. It's airbrushed bluish teal at the bottom and green at the top. There's no fine details. We'll put those in later. Now, the cool thing is, if you were just simply, all you wanted to do was get this guy on the table, he's going to look pretty good at this point when I get him all painted. It'll look really cool. So we've got that leg on there. Pretty good. One thing, I want this top area, I want him to pop on the table. So I want really vibrant color. So I want this top area to be very opaque. So I'm going to do what's called insisting on my color. So I'm going to come back in and paint the same color directly over it at 100% opacity, but I'm not going to go down into my blending area. So like the side of this where it starts blending into the teal, I'm not even going to touch that. I'm only going to put my second coat of green in areas where it's completely green. So like this is pretty much dried right here, or kind of dry. So I'm just going to put this right down the middle right there. So I'm putting, again, thick paint on there so that it is opaque. I want it to be green. Over here you can see where the green is a little bit see-through, so I want to get rid of that. In some cases, you might like that. That's the start of your texture. Great. But for this and in learning, I want my colors to be solid and really, really good. Same with my shadows. Down where the shadows are, I want that to be that tentacle blue. So I'm going to paint this side real quick, and then we'll come back and do a second coat on this, and I'll actually start putting a kind of a pseudo highlight in as well. So go here. Again, if you got questions, ask them, because I could just talk all night, so it's cool. And Liz knows this. That's why she's got a timer on me.
Also, I'm going to go ahead and warn everyone, our dog is probably going to bark in just a couple of minutes.
Because it's like that.
Yeah, because that's what she does. Just don't be alarmed.
So also notice I'm not picking up my brush, and I'm also kind of going back and forth. And when I see a problem area where it's not blending very well, I just keep moving back and forth right in that area. I just make sure that it blends completely. Sometimes that doesn't work, but oftentimes it does. So notice I missed a part right down the center, but since this is technically tentacle blue, solid tentacle blue, solid tentacle blue, so solid tentacle blue right here should work without leaving marks. When I first started blending, everything was a blend. Even up in the midtones, there was always blends going on all over the place, so I could never come back in and just paint a solid color in that place because it would wreck my blend. This way is much better because I've got lots of areas where I can just put that solid color in, and we're good to go. Question?
Yes. Will the fine details be added by hand or by using like washes and stuff?
You can do both. Either or. So washes are great for getting in the crevices and stuff and kind of pushing down some shadows. I usually I go by this motto. If I have to paint something and then wash it to make it darker and then put more of that same color on top to make it lighter again, I should have just started with the darker color and avoid the wash altogether. But that being said, sometimes you want these little micro shadows like in the wrinkles around the knee and stuff. Putting a controlled wash just right there works great. Now highlights, I always put the highlights in by hand. Technically, you could do a wash and then whatever's left is the highlight, but it's not very controllable. So I like to control it. I'm a control freak when it comes to painting. Everything else in my life is completely out of control, but
accurate.
Painting is somewhat in control. Go like this. You notice I don't clean my brush off because I don't want the paint to dry that I need to blend it into. So, and also these two colors are playing really well together. So whatever of that tentacle blue is still on my brush, it just starts blending in with the green, which is nice because that gives me even a better blend. Like that. Over here, there's a lot of black going on over here, or darker color. So I'm just gonna do this whole backside. You see I'm getting really good coverage with these colors. Actually, this tentacle blue is fantastic for coverage. So you'll find certain colors are better for wet blending than others. Quite honestly, maybe those brown ones weren't the best ones to wet blend with because they are a little bit too transparent. Now maybe it's just that I didn't shake them well enough. That could be it too. Usually browns are pretty opaque. So, but as you start finding the colors that work better than others in your collection, those are the ones you use for base coating. Doesn't work, don't use it. But the ones that are thinner are much better for glazing. So it's not like you have to get rid of your colors. It's just using them more smarter. Got that in right there. Do the back of this leg. Now I could technically use an even bigger brush than this. I could use like a big filbert brush, the big fat brushes that are rounded on the edges. And I would get paint on the model even faster. So depending on the size of your model, you might really think about, the size of your brushes that you're using, because it just makes life a lot easier. You're not fighting the brush. There it is. Go down on the side here. I'm always trying to start my brush stroke up where I want that color to be completely opaque. So I just drop it in there. It's really thick. And then move back to the area where I need the blend, or I don't need as much paint. So put a little bit more here on the top sides. Here's where you can start being strategic. I know I've got areas that are going to have highlights on them. So I don't need to just obliterate all my shadows here. I can use the shadow that's already there from the zenithal highlight and only put my second coat of paint right on that top ledge.
We are halfway through. If you wanted to take your 5-minute break and then let that dry.
I don't take breaks. Where we're going. Right. The bummer part is I don't really have a 5-minute break thing set up because I took it out.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll just keep going.
We'll just keep going.
Yeah.
All right. So this is much drier. I think it's good. So you might ask, how long can you keep working this area? And part of that is just you start noticing it's almost too dry to paint some more. It will start pulling paint off. But I know just from experience that I can just keep adding paint to these colors when they're wet like this. So you just get better at knowing when you need to stop putting brush strokes on the model, because it will actually be counterproductive. But right now, I could put a highlight color way up here in the highlight area if I wanted to, because that's still wet enough to blend in. So, but I'm not going to do that. Do a little bit of this right here.
And if y'all want, Aaron can show you how he does the highlighting and stuff after.
Well, yeah, I was going to show that anyways.
Okay, well, good.
Well, yeah, I'm just going to wet blend it in. All day long. So I'll start doing, insisting on color. Now I'm just putting solid green over the areas I want it to be really, really green. So I see this natural sort of highlight that's left up right there. You could always, if your brush is too big at this point, this is where you could go and find a smaller brush. I'm going to use one of these Monument Hobbies brushes, size 0. These brushes work great for this type of thing. In fact, I don't even know if this is Klinsky. Yeah, it is Klinsky. They have Klinsky Sable and synthetics. They both work fairly well. I like their smaller brushes the best. So you see right here, I've got that area that I know is going to be a highlight. So instead of just putting green solid down here, I'm just going to put solid green right on top of that area right there. Maybe on top of this one. These aren't the final highlights. It's just I'm setting it up for later. Like it's like, okay, I know that there's going to be a highlight there. I don't need to obliterate these shadows. I can just put some of my highlights in right now while I'm base coating. Sometimes this is nice because you got other areas that are drying, and so it's just a way for you to use your time more efficiently. Go like maybe a couple of these right here. Goliath is awesome because he has so many wrinkles. So you can really use these wrinkles to your advantage. Just get a little bit like that in there. So I'm constantly switching brushes when I'm painting because it's like I need a bigger one, I need a smaller one. It's not like I'm using the size 0 today and I'm not going to use anything else. You don't need to do that. Break all the rules, including mine. Got that right there. I'm going to put a little bit, even though I don't really have a highlight back here, I want to have something to kind of just differentiate these body parts. I'm going to do a little bit lighter green right there. Still very dark because there's black underneath it. I think I want to do that over here too. So this is dry. So I'm going to put a little bit of my shadow color basically right there. Stop. Grab my highlight color or my midtone. So usually with wet blending I do midtone to shadow. That's all right, so that gave me a little bit of color interest right there. That looks cool. And you see how well that green covered the dark bluish black. And that's because it's at 100%. If I had thinned that green out, I wouldn't have that same coverage. So, okay, so we got that. This top area, we need to bump those colors up. So, like I said, we can do what's called insisting on color, which is adding the same exact color again to make it opaque in certain areas. Don't put that color in blended areas because you're going to have problems. So just put them in opaque areas or areas you want opaque and you're fine. So I'm going to skip that a little bit because I want to start putting a little bit of a highlight in. So we can use our pale flesh, which is a very yellowy color, and maybe I want to see what it actually looks like before I put it on there. So grab some green and put it in with the pale flesh, and that makes this weird. The pale flesh is very yellowy, so I think that can make a fairly good highlight there. It's not going to be super vibrant. Like when I did the Goliath for the studio, I used more of a yellow. So like more of this type of yellow into my green to make it really, really pop. But I think on this, I want something a little bit maybe more realistic. So using this paler color might look a little more realistic. Maybe it won't, but we'll find out. So I know that a highlight would generally just go across the top of these muscle groups. So again, I'm not picking out each muscle group. I'm just picking the general. There's a highlight that goes right down the middle. Consider this leg like a cylinder. And that light is coming down and it's just sitting right on top here. So front to back, it's going to be a highlight. So I'm going to put this color right here. And again, it's going to be easier to start with the highlight color here because then when I go this way, I can pull my shadow up into the highlight. Actually, that's wrong. I think it'll be easier to start with the shadow color. And this is where some trial and error comes in, good. Yeah, it's very handy. So I'm going to put this right here. So again, I'm only going to do one side of the leg at a time. So I'll put in my green where I want it to be opaque up here. And then we're going to grab on that brush my lighter color and we'll just set it in right on top. So I'm going to start it up here towards the front. Move it back. Blend that in. I need more paint. Maybe we'll go on this side. This is when I can go the other side of it. So I'll put that highlight across the top of these. If I run my brush lightly, sometimes it almost does like a dry brush effect, but with very wet paint. So run that across the top, grab my mid-tone color, and start it about halfway up, and basically blend it in with that highlight color. This, I can run some of these streaks down into the shadow, and that starts giving me a little bit better highlight. So this side's a little bit darker. It's not a huge change, but it's a little bit, and that's like the start of my highlight. So we'll try it on the other side. I need more green. We're burning through color on this Goliath. What is the question?
These are multiple layers of undiluted paint over very fine details. Isn't there a danger of clogging details?
Nope. Because I'm not gobbing it on. I'm just painting it on kind of in a controlled fashion where the brush is putting down a thin layer of that thick paint. So also little bits of detail being clogged up isn't going to matter on this. Like there's so much detail on this. Like if it was like if you were painting like a Space Marine and they had that tiny like lettering in between the like shoulder pads, that might start having problems. Or if you got a chest plate, like and the conquistadors won't have this problem because they don't have a lot of filigree on their armor. But if they had really tiny little etched in filigree on their armor, you would be more careful in this respect. But otherwise, like you can see over here, like there's no detail missing, and I've put that paint on fairly thick. But I'm putting it on thick in a very thin, controlled fashion. So it's not like I'm being reckless about it. Now, could you fill up that? Like if I put paint on, like we'll just do it right here. If I put a big glob of paint like that, that's a problem right there. You can actually see how thick that paint is. You don't want to do that. So you get paint on and then you move it around. So see, I took that big glob of paint and I've actually worked it this whole area. So just keep working it. It will eventually run out. And then it's a really good opportunity to bring in your shadow color and blend it up into that mid-tone color. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So basically, don't be reckless with this thick paint, but at the same time, you want the thick paint. You want it working for you. So once you can wrangle it, you will be master of all you survey. That looks nice. It's bluish green back here, super vibrant green up there. Now you got to remember there will be final highlights on this, so I don't want to go too bright with my highlights, but I think I could probably get away with a little bit more. So let's mix up some more of my highlight color over here. Here's a little tip for when you're highlighting colors and stuff. If you go too desaturated with your highlight, and so the tendency is you're going to start adding this color, more of this color, more of this color, and then you're going to add white, and you're going to get it lighter and lighter and lighter. And what that tends to do, because you're desaturating the color, it flattens out how you visually see that area. So it actually doesn't look like a highlight anymore. It just looks like flat. It looks dull. So if you can keep your paint more saturated, and by more saturated I mean have more color in it. So this is starting to get desaturated. If I throw in some more green over here, see I can start making a more saturated version of, and that's like really glary right there, but more saturated right there, it will be more effective in your highlight areas. But I want a lighter color because I'm blending them together. All right, so we're going to put, I'm going to do, he's sort of leaning over the front part of his thigh, so maybe the main highlight is going to be more right here. So we'll just plop some of that paint in right there, right here.
While you're plopping paint real quick.
I'll wipe my brush off.
We have
Hit me.
Question-ish. So Michael, yes, he did go over that earlier, but I can have him do it again.
I don't mind doing it again. We're here. Let's do
doing
this.
one color into another, not just like light to dark. So we'll.
Okay, what was the question? Doing one color
and yes, blending one color.
So like
another,
red to green or
not
something?
Just, yeah, like not just light to dark.
Okay.
Because I think you did that with something, but I can't remember.
Yeah, the person asked about color theory or whatever, and so like what colors are better to put into other colors.
Yeah.
So
and here's, I'm relinking the color wheel in chat. So
good idea. Good idea. Okay.
That out.
So you see, I've added a highlight here. It's pretty effective because it's still very saturated, but it is lighter, and now I can put all my fine details in there. So like highlighting up the individual little bumps and cracks and all that stuff. But this is like my general vision. That's like the first highlight on there. And I did it in my base coat. So that's super, super awesome because it saves you a ton of time. And come in and just hit these front edges of these things to kind of pick out a little bit of details. That. Go up here. Like this. Blend that in. Again, I'm kind of following that zenithal prime, so wherever I see some whitish tones, I know that it's probably a good idea to put that mid-tone green in there. Just like that. That looks pretty cool. I'm going to put a highlight over here. So when I'm painting, I bounce around like crazy because I'm constantly looking for a spot that has not wet paint. So put my highlight right up here. My brush was too wet there, so it definitely was too thin. I'm just going to do that. I never make mistakes. No.
Right. You do a compilation of all the mistakes you've made.
So it was easier just to wipe that paint off and start over. So I'm going to put this up here. That's kind of my highlight color. I'll do my mid-tone color from like right there. Move it back up into the highlight. See if I can't get that fairly blended. Get it blended over here. If I feel like I could have a highlight there and maybe on the kneecap, while it's still wet, I can just put that paint very lightly. My brush stroke is very light. So that's one of the things that you're going to really have to start paying attention is how heavy-handed you are. I was teaching a student a while back, and she was having problems with her blends, and I couldn't figure out why it wasn't blending correctly. And I looked over, and this is the way she applied paint. Maybe not that bad, but it was pretty much just about that way.
Bad.
So notice I loaded my brush up, and there's no paint on the bottom of the space, or it's very little, because I pushed way too hard. So
I feel like you just got literally everybody's attention.
yeah. So you want a much lighter stroke. Now, obviously, this is not going to show up very well, but you want a lighter stroke when you're painting. You don't want to be heavy-handed. You're not pushing the brush into there. Even when I say you push harder, it's like a light. You're lightly pushing down and just massaging that paint back and forth. Massaging it. I don't want green on the bottom of my base, so I'm going to wipe it off.
Good idea. That's gross.
Okay. See, like that, just wet blend. Boom, boom, boom.
So pretty.
This is going to be an awesome
I'm
model. I'm
excited.
glad I'm painting it.
Is that what we're gonna fight next?
Maybe. Problem is, it doesn't work into this.
Stinking Harbinger.
Yeah. We had like 8 rounds with a Harbinger because it kept summoning Hellbats like crazy.
I just don't let me roll.
Yeah, Liz was rolling a 6 every time for the Hellbats, and it was like, oh my gosh. We finally killed the Harbinger.
Constant Hellbat.
And then I think the darkness fell and brought another threat in. So it was like, I mean, I thought for sure we might. I got knocked out.
You did?
I did. I was out.
I was like,
I checked out of that fight real quick.
Yep.
So again, not water, cleaning my brush. Just grab that green. Work it over all these details. You'll find too, when there's like really a lot of details in something, if you move your brush too quickly, you end up with like lots of little spaces where the paint didn't hit. And then you start looking at it later and you're like, oh man, I got to fix all these parts. So just slow your brush stroke down. Keep your brush stroke very light and just make sure it hits all the areas. Get a little bit more of my blue, tentacle blue, under that shadow area. We'll do our shadow blue back here, but we'll get rid of most of it. So again, a big blob of paint, but I'm not leaving it there. Look at that. It's totally smooth now. It's very thin. But it still has that opacity that we're just making stuff up at this point on a Thursday night. Go here. We'll start this one right here. Go backwards. So here's the funny thing. You could actually on purpose pick your brush up and add more brush strokes, and you start getting the start of your texture. So you always want to use everything to your advantage. And if you're thinking about these things, you can definitely use them to your advantage. So it doesn't always have to be a perfectly smooth base coat. Sometimes I purposely make a really not smooth base coat. I just got brown in my brush. We'll see what happens there, because it was on the palette and I grabbed it.
Well,
I think it's
somebody
brown.
threw mud at his face.
Yeah. So part of what makes your paint jobs look interesting is adding extra colors. Going from A to B, so going from this green to that tealish blue is boring, no matter how good the blend is. So you always want to add other colors in there. So we got our tealish blue down here. Start moving it up the side to meet that green. What if I want a different color down here? Let's grab our crimson. This paint's all wet down here, so I'm just going to plop it in there and start moving it around. Do it on the other side. This side of my paint's not as wet, but I think I can just sort of manipulate my brush and make it look like it's kind of blended. So that gave me a much darker shadow right there. I'm going to put this red in his mouth.
Down. Thank you.
Maybe he'll have like a bright pink tentacles or something coming out.
Yes.
So this red will make that pop pretty well. Well, it's not red, it's like a dark crimson. Again, I'm just trying to get paint on the model. I'm not too worried about super coverage right now because I can always put a second coat. My paint's thick enough to where it's gonna cover fairly well. So got that. I'm gonna insist on my red down here.
Michael said, I know that's for shadow, but a bright orangish red throat pouch would look cool.
That orange in these greens looks fantastic. So that's another one that doesn't technically work color theory wise, but it totally works. It just works. So this is another thing where just being inventive, just because my color wheel says I can't use these, like, this color and this super vibrant red together. There's ways that you can use those colors together. It's just a little bit more difficult to do. So got that. Do I even have orange? I do have orange right here. Let's see what would happen. So actually go from crimson to orange. That's a wild color combination. This is where also just looking at, references from animals and stuff like lizards and everything, you can start finding like really cool things in nature actually that are just amazing color-wise. I never thought that those colors could go well together, but they do. So at this point, I can take these. Now I could wet blend these on, but I could also layer them. So I'm always jumping between wet blending and then coming back in and putting some layers on. So if I want to bring up this color right here, I'm just going to pick out some of these raised areas. It's not technically a highlight area at all, but it's raised. It's a good spot to put a highlighty type color in the shadows. Should probably put my reading glasses on at this point because I just can't see.
I was wondering when that was going to happen. I'm surprised it took you long.
Sometimes I like not being able to see because then I can't see my mistakes. It's awesome.
It's always great.
Oops. Now, knowing the properties of my paint, I know that this orange is never going to cover all that well. So I can spend like 800 years slowly working it up to be 100% orange, or I could get it a little bit orange and then put some white in there and then put paint on that again. Orange paint on it. So I think that's what I'm going to do. That's what they say.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't, it's going to come out looking like a creamsicle.
Yeah.
Creamsicles. That sounds really good.
That does sound good.
If y'all have any other questions, please feel free to ask.
Where are we at time-wise?
30 minutes.
Okay. Let's get that on like that. This may still be wet, but we're just going for it. Yeah, that was wet. Usually when I get to paint for myself, it's usually on a Sunday during football season. So I'm watching football and I'm like literally like, okay, we can't let any of this paint dry because I've only got, while this game is on, to finish this model. Mm-hmm. So it's like you just go as fast as you possibly can.
Coming up soon.
Yep. Just a little bit of that orangey color. So, for sure, orange is across from blue, and since our teal color is a very bluish teal, we can kind of fudge a little bit that direction. So that being said, if I make sure that my teal color is very prominent right around where that orange is, it will look better. So if you notice where I'm painting areas that aren't blended, I do multiple little brush strokes like I told you not to do, but I'm not blending. So I think it's okay at that point to kind of like take little brush strokes, kind of adding a little bit of pigment as I go. Then I get to the bottom of this back, and I'll go right back to not picking my brush up, unless I need more paint.
Mm-hmm.
See, if I just keep going up, eventually that paint's going to run out completely. Like I could technically get a pretty good blend from blue to white if I wanted, but I don't want that. So
Bring it down.
break it down.
No, bring it down. Bring it down, babe. Really?
I just thought
You
we were
just thought I
getting
was over here just
doing some rapping, gangster
breaking
boogie.
it down.
Again, sometimes if you just watch what your brush is doing, you can get the start of some really cool textures going just with your wet blend. So don't be afraid to just watch your paint dry. If you take some of my online courses, we talk a lot about watching your paint dry. And then we do it over the course of a month. It's pretty awesome. Get a little bit more here. So I can start seeing areas where like I either missed or I need to insist on that color, get it more opaque. Looks pretty cool. Like that. Getting into Zen mode. Forget the teaching, just go.
What?
And then he shut up and finished the model.
You just kept painting.
No. After all these years, I still love painting. I absolutely love it. Even when I hate it, I love it. It's very, very Zen moments of just peace. Especially when things work out. The good news is I haven't spent enough time on painting this to where if I was like, hey, I don't really like that green, I could go with a different color. And technically just cover all this up again, So definitely is nice having that option. So I put a whole bunch of paint in there and we just start moving it around. So it doesn't fill up those details. Now you do got to watch, you do got to pay attention. Maybe the first couple times you do this, you actually do fill up some details because you didn't move the paint around and thin it out on the model. So it is possible to fill up some details or put extra lines in there that you weren't intending to put in, from brushstroke lines and stuff like that. So you just kind of got to be careful. Just grab our highlight color. We'll just plop it right in there, right on top of the other wet paint. Again, I'm just kind of putting it in the area where I think the highlight should go. Can always change that later. If you're an airbrusher, you can put this in by hand, then take your airbrush and fix all the blends. Oops. Just kind of insisting on that color. Purple. I know Shadow's paint has purple. Oh, there it is. So what if like his tentacles went from green to purple? I need to shake this one a little bit better. All right.
Oh no.
It's all right. So this color I can already see is very see-through on my palette, so it's going to be kind of a problem color, but we're just going to do it. So down here, I don't want really any blend, so I'm just letting the zenithal prime kind of dictate how light or dark my color is. But if I do it right, it will actually look pretty good. And then I can just highlight up and save myself a ton of time. I always hear people like complaining about a color not covering as well or being too thick or too thin. I think instead of complaining about the colors, just figure out how to use them better. Every color is different. And some colors work better for glazing, some colors work better for wet blending. And when you try to use them for the opposite, then your life is a nightmare. So sort of pay attention to your paints, how they behave, and start using them for what they're best at. Green, pop it in up here, start blending it in with the purple. Insist on our color up here. Not the best blend right there, so I'm going to put some more purple right here. Wipe my brush out really quick. See, I'm pushing that brush flat onto my model, so it's really like pressing harder on the paint thinning it out, making it blend a lot better. Or as good as it's going to blend, that's how it blends. Just keep that. Go all the way down into there. So now it goes from green to purple. And again, I can adjust that as I need to make it better or worse sometimes, but typically you want it to be better. I'm using my smaller brush because I just want a little bit of purple at the edge of this side right here. Not super worried if it's blending real well, because this is a lot of streaks that are going to happen there with highlighting and stuff. Now the cool thing is you can highlight every single detail by hand with a brush, or you could dry brush it. If you just want to go fast, you can dry brush that and it looks really, really cool. So once I get that in there, I can also bring some of this purple and pull it up through some of these cracks up into the green. Okay.
What happens if you want to fix something in areas where the colors are blended, or repeat a coat that is too thin?
You just do the same exact blend again. So like I did on this thing right here, so this is still a little blotchy right there, but it was really blotchy before, so I blended over the whole thing again. So if we did this again, so instead of trying to go, I'm going to try to blend between right here and right there, you just need to blend the whole thing again. So if I come in here,
make sure your brush is clean so you're not using
purple.
Yeah.
Purple. This, I can come in here. Now maybe I don't have to go all the way to the edge anymore because I've already got opaque color way out here. So I'm going to put this on. Notice I leave a big blob and I start moving this out. And I come back to it and I move out the other side. Like that. Grab the lighter color, blob it up here, move it into my blend. Grab a little bit more paint, put it up here at the top edge. I'm pressing very lightly so I don't mess up my paint too much. And then sometimes I just have to do some light brush strokes to kind of get it a little bit better. So I can get that. Now, once this dries, it may still have a couple like little streaks in here, but that's where some glazes and stuff start fixing that. So, it's just a matter of if I need to fix an area on top with no blend, I just put the paint in right there. No blending involved.
All right.
If it's the whole blend, I do the whole thing again.
So second follow-up question, so you redo the whole area to fix one little spot?
Yeah.
Yes. Or if you are just like really determined to not have to repaint the entire thing over again, you can sit there and try to figure out exactly what color goes in that little spot.
Yeah.
By mixing your colors.
By mixing, yeah. And then that also helps you learn how to mix your colors. So if I want to get a shadow up here, but I want it to be a combination of that blue and this green, I'm going to have to start mixing this blue and this green. The thing is, that sounds like a lot of work to repaint the whole area, but it really isn't. I mean, repainting one of these legs goes very quick. I'm doing it slowly because I'm talking and, doing all my thing. Well, but you just put it in, boom, make the blend, and go with it.
It's also not like you've already done like all of your detail work and then you realize that you need to go back. You're still in the base coat phase. So.
Right. And some of what you'll realize is, if you were putting a texture in, having your blend not be perfect is actually a benefit because that adds to the texture. So like when I'm wet blending like a sandy base or something, I purposely a lot of times will not blend it perfectly. Like I make sure that it's really choppy because that'll be like the first textures in my rocks, is some of those bad blends. They're bad blends, but you use them to your advantage. So like on this model, I wouldn't consider anything a bad blend on him because there's so many areas that you have to detail out. Even with dry brushing, we'll cover up a lot of bad blends just automatically. But That purple doesn't look half bad.
I think it looks great. All right, we're at 15 minutes.
Okay. So, any other questions? Did that answer that question? I hope.
Yeah. And then, did you do?
Oh, you know what? I can do. Let me demo this technique on this little bitty face,
Oh, okay.
and then
We'll do one more thing.
some
of doing,
jazzercise.
a super bright random color into another super bright random color or something. We'll figure it out.
Okay, so I've got sort of a mid-toning color here. I'm going to add brown to it just to make it darker. I'm going to use the dark flesh, actually. A dark version of this. So in this case, I am using a smaller brush because it is probably smart. Got a really small face. So first I'm just gonna add stuff in all the areas that are gonna be like my darkest shadows and stuff. So like under the chin, all that stuff. Not really worried about blending right there. Maybe on the neck a little bit. That, and then grab this.
What colors are you using?
I'm using dark flesh and then light flesh.
Okay.
And then possibly that pale flesh at the end. So, yeah. So I'll put the dark color back here on his cheek. I'll grab my mid-tone color, flip the model around, and we're going to put that in his face right here. Again, you got to work quickly because if it dries, it ain't blending. So sometimes you got to go in from different angles. This is where sometimes pulling back towards yourself doesn't always work because you just don't have the room. So you got to figure it out. Put some more of this dark color back here. This side we actually can do that. So you notice I like wipe paint off on my finger a lot. So that gets rid of a lot of the excess. And on the face, you literally almost don't need to blend it. Like just the two colors being next to each other oftentimes looks pretty blended. So you do want to blend it a little bit, but you don't have to blend like a perfect blend because it's just so small you can't tell. You see I'm just putting multiple little layers on here. It's not a whole lot of paint, so it's drying fairly quickly. I'm just trying to get those colors on there. Good. So I go from darker in the back and then it blends up to the front. Now this one's a little bit weird because you've got this strap right here. And so I know I don't need to blend over that strap. So like I kind of just stopped right there. But I do have it. It is darker right before it gets to the strap. So if we grab... need to shake up this black even better. Can you bring me some of that Reaper black?
Sure thing.
So a lot of times what I use the Shadows of Brimstone black on is like when I'm dark lining between areas, it flows so well. It's not super opaque, but it flows really well, and I can get really, really fine, tiny lines in between things. So it works really good for that. So again, don't fight the paint on what it does. Find out what it does really well and use it for that.
And it's clogged, so just FYI.
It's always clogged.
Yep.
Like this. Sometimes it's good to just black these areas out right away so that you're not confused while you're painting the face, and consistently highlighting a leather strap with skin tones. That. And then once I've got my sort of wet blend of the face on, again, it's a little anticlimactic. It's not the most exciting step. I come back in and then I hit the areas right in the center of the face so that they start getting more opaque, that lighter color. So I might need to do like 2 or 3 coats of that, but it does go very quickly. Just keep coming back in, hit like the nose, the cheeks, those upper cheekbones. And I can take some of that pale skin because it's really, really light. It might be too yellowy, so I'm just going to mix some of my light flesh with the pale flesh. Get a hybrid of the two. These in. Start bringing out some little highlights on the cheekbones, just a little bit. So this pale flesh shows up really well because of how much yellow's in it. So the yellow is going to do a lot of work for you. If you painted the base coat this yellow color, you'd have a very jaundiced looking model and it wouldn't be very hot. But if you're only using it on the highlights, it shows up really, really well. It makes your highlights pop.
Saturation.
Yes, the saturated colors. And again, when I'm painting, I oftentimes don't paint something to completion right off the bat. I do this as like my rough draft. I get these colors on. It gives me an idea of what it could look like. That looks okay. It's not perfect, but it's coming along. I'll highlight above his lips there. And then I start working on other elements of the model. And that way I can get the whole model base coated using wet blending basically and be able to see what everything's going to look like in the end very, very quickly. Like if I wanted to do...
Bright. If you want to do bright colors, there's these two.
Man, this is going to look...
I mean, not on him, but...
This is gonna...
Sure, why not?
Yeah, this is... We're going to show you why not to do this. It's okay, though. I mean, who knows? Maybe this is the color combination you wanted, and for whatever reason you need to blend between the two colors.
I just picked literally 2 bright colors.
Yeah, well, they're bright. That's my brightest teal and one of my brightest magentas. So, all right, so we're going to go down here. Start this on this end. Working very lightly with my pressure and then pushing a little harder. So it starts flattening that paint out. Halfway up the model. This color right here. I already know I have way too much paint on my brush, so I'll just wipe it off. So the weird thing that will happen with this, so like certain colors, when they blend, it's like a very, like here, it went from green to like darker bluish green. So there's not like, it doesn't, those two colors don't form a darker color. Magenta and teal make purple. Did you know that, Liz?
I did, actually.
You do know that, because I
have a degree.
Oh, well, I didn't know that, and then I discovered it on accident. It makes probably one of the most fantastic purples you got. So it actually makes a darker color in between the two colors than those two colors. So it'll always look a little bit weird. So if you're okay with that, that's totally fine. Now, what you could do is, let's go on this side.
Yeah, so just so that you don't think that I'm just weird, for the colors that I chose them because he had asked about colors that don't mix well.
Yeah. No, and this is it's a perfect opportunity to show what happens. So I've got teal. So this is where an opportunity, you know that the magenta is going to make like a purple or a darker color. So instead of going to magenta, we'll actually use the magenta as our shadow. And we'll mix in that teal into the magenta completely and create a darker purplish color down here. And that blends with our teal up there. So see, you would never know that I started with magenta to get that shadow color. Now again, this blend is not totally perfect, but I think it's okay because of how much detail is on this shoulder pad. There's all those little lines going across, and so I think it'll be fine. I could also just put another layer on. But you see how that kind of works. This one I also could have gotten a little bit better blend in there, but I think that gives you a good idea. So, I mean, it would be a very interesting samurai. Like, this would be like the most colorful samurai on earth. And it wouldn't, I mean, there's a certain beauty to that too. But maybe that looks a little bit better because you've got two colors that it goes from lighter to darker instead of lighter to darker to lighter again, which is just strange. So it's just one of those things where you got to play around with it. But I think that's also where learning your colors and learning how to work them is really important. So that's where all the practice comes in, right? So if we did this, like this armor would be really cool as like this lipstick pink magenta. I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
Man. So Michael said that reminds me of the trend of vaporwave painted miniatures earlier this year. I missed that entire trend.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm a social media manager,
that
and
like
I missed that entire trend.
Was that like a Kickstarter thing or?
No, baby, it's like it's how they paint it. I'm trying to show you.
So oh yeah. So like heat signature type thing or something.
Yeah. That's super.
But you see how that worked? That's teal to magenta, but I just blended the teal completely into the magenta to make a darker color.
Oh, that's perfect.
That actually does look really cool.
Yeah.
All
right, we got 1 minute.
All right. So any last questions before I go eat second dinner?
Oh my gosh.
Or glunch? All right. So, that being said, a couple of announcements.
Super fun announcements.
Super fun. So.
Oh, actually, shoot, I meant to do something. You go ahead, and then I'll have one announcement.
It's not so much an announcement, but don't forget to enter the contest, the Roll to Move 2022 contest. You got to enter your models this weekend. Get them in there. I mean, even if you don't think you can win, it's cool just participating in this stuff and maybe getting some feedback afterwards or something, or just being able to share your work. It's always fun to share our work. A painted miniature is always a win. So get some of your stuff up in there, and that should be pretty cool. Now, the other thing that I wanted to show you guys, Liz and I both do online teaching. We also teach at conventions like DiceFest or Adepticon. ReaperCon is another one where you can come and see us live and get instruction, hands-on instruction. But over COVID, we learned that we could do it online too. And so we came up with some really cool classes, online courses and stuff online. And if you go over to www.miniaturemonthly.com, you will see stuff like this. And these are the online classes when they are. Some of them are pre-recorded, so if you don't even want to attend a live class, a lot of my classes, they're very in-depth. They last over a month, so it's 4 Saturdays in a row. There's lots of practice in between with feedback and stuff that we do in our Discord. Really good community building and stuff like that. These are fun classes. If you'd like to get some more instruction, I do not only this meet in the middle technique, but all the different wet blending techniques that I use. You can check that out there at miniaturemonthly.com. If you want to just go to our Patreon, that's Patreon.com/miniaturemonthly, something like that.
Patreon.com/miniaturemonthly.
That's it. So lots of opportunities to learn new techniques. Our Patreon is actually 3 different artists, so you get to learn different ways of doing it, because the way I do it is not always the best way for you. So I always encourage people to learn from different techniques from different people, because one of them will gel, or maybe a combination of several techniques will become your technique. So the key to it is we want you to succeed. So do what you got to do that. The other thing is you got to practice. So I have some students who don't ever practice at all, and guess what? They don't get any better. So you need to practice. The more you practice, the better you will get. Even when it feels like slow and you're not learning too much, you are learning something. So.
Okay, and then my quick announcement, because I just remembered that I needed to do that. We have a 10% off coupon code for our website for our online classes.
Oh.
And this is just for Roll to Move. Nobody else gets this super fancy discount code. The discount code is R2M10. Super easy. Roll to Move 10.
Yeah, R2M10. And is any of that capitalized?
It's all capitalized.
It's all capitalized.
Yes.
So
there you have it. You can use that code for 10% off an online class on miniaturemonthly.com.
Yeah. So we've got a weathering class coming up, which you can use on many Shadows Brimstone models. We have an airbrushing class, so if you're getting into airbrushing or you're just having problems with your airbrush, that is a really good class to take. We've taught a lot of students that class. And then we've got a non-metallic metal class. We've got our blending class, which is later in the year. But all of them can be purchased pre-recorded also, so you can just watch it at your own leisure. You don't even have to participate in a group. So the group thing is nice, though, because you actually you need to do stuff each week. So and it's awesome. We have a lot of fun, and I get feedback every day for those classes. So the live classes are definitely the best. But that being said, thank you all for joining us here. I hope you guys are enjoying your Roll to Move weekend, and you're able to play some games and stuff and get to do all the stuff you want to do.
Ooh, yeah.
We will see you
y'all for joining
tomorrow
us.
night, where we put some texture on big things. Yeah.
You're welcome.
We'll even talk about it here. I can actually show you. Might as well, because I have them out. These are some of our gaming pieces. There's my Harbinger. Let's get them into focus. It's pretty cool. Pretty wicked and scary.
We're going to be going
I
over
did
some of that
some
stuff
very
tomorrow.
easy techniques that save time, but make them look a little bit more textury. You got scratches and stuff in metal to make things look really, really cool. So, and again, these are on some of the custom bases that I've created. So very cool. So hopefully we see you tomorrow. We'll probably be working on I've got another Harbinger that I want to paint, but I'll probably also be working on this Goliath. So very cool. Alrighty. We will see you all later.
Bye.
Bye. Have a good one.